The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Amateur Traveler, episode 895. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about jellyfish and brain coral and giant clams, World War II history, secluded beaches, and kayaking as we go to Palau. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the tropical country of Palau. I'd like to welcome to the show Randy Rohrer from Maryland, who's come to talk to us about Palau. I should say welcome back to the show, Randy.
Thanks, Chris. Big fan of the show and very happy to be back talking with you.
And I say welcome back. Randy did a real fun show ways back on rafting the Grand Canyon. And Palau is a little more obscure. I think a lot of people who like travel have heard of Palau, especially people who like scuba diving and snorkeling. But Randy, what was your connection with Palau?
First of all, this is my second trip there. I was there 11 years ago. I have a rafting guide friend who helped organize both of these trips that I went to Palau. One of her friends owns the company that we went with. And so it's through her that I got connected into going. She organized trips of her past clients and friends to go to Palau. And so I got roped into that, and I'm very glad I did get roped into that.
Cool. And let's put it on a map. Where is Palau?
Palau is one of those places that when you say people may have heard of it, but they have no idea where it is. And was my situation too. Palau is in the Western Pacific in the Northern Hemisphere. Mm-hmm. It's about 500 miles east of the Philippines and about 500 miles north of Indonesia. And it's right between Guam and the Philippines in the middle of the ocean.
All right. Excellent. And why should someone go to Palau?
I think people should go to Palau if you wanted to experience incredible, diverse underwater marine life, colorful corals, clear, warm water. It's an unspoiled underwater paradise with beautiful sandy beaches, and it also has an interesting World War II history. When we were there, we saw colorful corals, fish of all species and sizes, jellyfish, turtles, sharks, squid, manta ray, dolphins, giant clams, and all kinds of exotic plants.
Excellent. What kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Okay, so this itinerary can be pretty flexible. I'll talk a little bit about this in more detail, but you'll be flying into the main city of Koror. There's a few things there you can spend one day at, visiting museums and an aquarium. I'm going to recommend a day trip visiting the larger island of Babelbob. There's some interesting cultural things there. So there's a couple days you can spend doing that, but in general, you're going to be spending most of your time out in the islands. Palau is in like an archipelago of over 500 islands. And again, talk about it in more detail, but you can spend anywhere from a few days to a couple weeks out in these islands through various methods. I guess what I can do is I can describe what we did in our trip, but
Sure.
there's a lot of flexibility to tone it to your interest and the length of time that you have.
Okay. Great. So you started us in Kuror.
Yeah, first of all, maybe I should just mention about getting there. It's not the easiest itinerary to book. If you're coming from North America, you're very likely to fly through Hawaii and then Guam into Kuror. There are flights from the Philippines and I believe also Singapore. But in general, you're probably going to be flying through Guam. And the thing to note is that there's not necessarily flights every day from Guam. They may
Hmm.
only fly 3 or 4 days a week. So you're going to have to time your itinerary such that you hit on one of those days you want to fly into Kuror. There is really only one big airport. It's on the island of Babaldob. And that's connected by road to a nearby island of Kuror. It's the island of Kuror, and that's where the main city is, the city of Kuror. And so you're undoubtedly going to be spending time in Kuror at the beginning and end of your trip. The whole population of Palau is about 18,000 people,
Oh,
and
wow.
Kuror itself is about 14,000. So obviously, the main concentration of people are in Kuror and around Kuror area. There's a variety of hotels in Karor that you can stay at all levels. There's a big fancy resort. There's a lot of medium level hotels. And personally, when I travel somewhere so far away, I like to build in an extra day to arrive early just to recover from traveling and jet lag and everything. If you can do that, I would recommend it because you're going to be pretty wiped out by the time you get there. Let's see. Maybe I can discuss a few things you might do when you're in Karor. There is a very nice museum that I would recommend called the Epison Museum. Epison was actually the person who donated money to create the museum. It focuses on Palau history, culture, and it's excellent. You could probably spend an hour or two there. It's not a huge museum, but it's very nice. Another nice thing to do in Karur is to visit the Palau Aquarium. They focus obviously on the marine life and fish of the Pacific area. You could probably spend an hour or two at the aquarium. Again, it's not a huge aquarium by what you might be thinking. But it's very nice to see the local ecology and fish in the area there. Those might be nice things to do before you head out into the islands. The tour of the larger island of Babaldob is focused on cultural things. Let's see. One of the things you see there, you may stop at, is you'll see these stone monoliths, much like you might see at Easter Island,
Oh,
although they're not quite carved as intricately or like faces and things like that. They're more like just stone monoliths with a few etchings in them. And those were there from some of the original inhabitants who traveled there from other islands of the Pacific. So that's one of the things you might do in Babaldob. The actual capital of Karor is on that island. It's this interesting structure in the middle of nowhere, and it's freely you can go and walk around the grounds. And if you're lucky, an attendant might invite you in and give you a little tour inside the first floor of the Capitol. And we were fortunate to be able to do that. And the other thing I might mention is there's the Palau National Museum. This is actually the official government museum of Palau, cultural artifacts. We did not go there. I'm not sure. Be honest, I would probably recommend the Epstein Museum over this, but that
okay.
might be a place to spend some time. And as far as getting to Babaldob and driving around, you can rent a car. Palau, they drive on the right side of the road. But you have to be a little careful because a lot of the automobiles they get come from Japan and other places. And so
Hmm.
often the vehicles will have the driver on the right hand side of the car, but you still drive on the right hand side of the road. I personally did not drive. One of the people in our group did rent a car for a day and they had no problems getting around. Our trip in Babaldob was organized by the tour company we were with. So they had a
Hmm.
van and took us around and had a guide and everything. And so that can be easily arranged in Palau. For us, that was all set up ahead of time.
Well,
So
and it looks like if you drive the whole road, it's 38 miles.
it's slow driving. It's a
Yep.
small, twisty roads, but it's not a huge island. It's the
Hmm.
largest island in Palau. So it's large by Palau standards. But yeah, easily a half a day. If you're really interested in spending more time, a day would be good. If you were arranging a trip to Palau, I would probably think about spending a day visiting the museums in Karur and scheduling for a day or most of a day for traveling around Babildab,
Hmm.
and then the rest of your time out in the islands, snorkeling and kayaking and diving or other
Okay.
things what to do. So the order in which you do that is probably up to you of how it best meets your plans and itinerary. But I think it would be nice to go to some of those museums early on in your trip to see a little bit more of the background of the culture and everything. Um, so
Excellent. And then we're heading out to the archipelago. We're heading out to the islands. Where did you go?
yeah, there's as far as activities, there's kayaking. These are typically sit on top kayaks,
Hmm.
very easy paddling. You don't really have to be very experienced. It's calm, flat water. Obviously, lots of snorkeling opportunities and diving. Our trip was not a dive trip. We did not
Hmm.
dive, but there's lots of opportunities for diving if you want to dive. We were with a company called Paddling Palau. It's one of the it's one of the main companies that organize trips, and they do day trips out to these islands. So you can actually arrange to go out and visit an island and do a day of snorkeling and kayaking and come back into Karor, spend the night in a
Okay.
hotel. That's an option. We went on a camping safari. I think their typical camping safari is about 10 days, although we had a custom trip that we were like out there for 14 days.
Okay.
And I'll describe our camping safari. They have a support boat,
Yep.
and all the kayaks and gear and all the people are on actually two boats. One is taking all the kayaks and people, and there's a secondary boat that goes out and sets up camp and moves camp from island to island. So we
Okay.
would typically spend 2 nights, sometimes 3 nights on an island, and from the island, use that as a launching point to kayak or take the boat out to a snorkeling place or just about every combination you might think of. We might paddle out of camp one day. The boat might pick us up and put our kayaks back on the boat and go back to camp. We might just take the boat out and snorkel off the boat. We might take the boat out and launch kayaks off the boat. Whatever might be appropriate to where we were going. Some people don't want to camp, and so they like the idea of doing these day trips to come back and stay in a hotel.
Mhm.
The issue with that is as you get further and further away from Karor, some of the outer islands and the outer reef area, it takes so long to get out there. You might take an hour to 2 hours of a boat ride to get there and to come if you're to come back to Karor. So that's one of the advantages of going and camping is you don't have to come back to Karor every night and you can spend the night on the islands and spend more time out there. Oh, as far as camping, people might be concerned that they don't not really like camping or anything. This is cushy camping. This is bordering on glamping. They have these big walk-in tents with
Mhm.
cots, have a sun shower at every tent, nice little foot bath outside so that you can put your sandy feet in this little tub and wash off your feet before you get in the tent. And then they have a separate dining tent set up and they do all the cooking and provide all the food. You have a nice cooked breakfast in the morning and a nice cooked dinner in the evening. And during the day, we usually stop and have a picnic style lunch. And so while if it's in a day where we're moving camps, we might go out and be snorkeling and kayaking while the support boat is moving our camp to a new location. Throughout the season, they run these trips so much they often will leave these camps set up. They're almost set up as a permanent camp, at least on a seasonal basis. So that's the camping situation. You ask where we went. There's a lot of these pretty famous islands. One of the places we camped and spent time at was Oolong Beach. And fans of Survivor might know that name because I believe it was like the second season of Survivor was filmed in Palau. And Oolong Beach was the site of one of the camps of one of the Survivor teams. So I'm a big Survivor fan, so that was a little bonus and plus to say that I camped on Oolong Beach where the survivors camped. One of the very famous place to go I would highly recommend called Jellyfish Lake. A
Hmm.
lot of people will do day trips there from Karur. We were actually camping nearby, so it was nice we could actually have a little bit more time and pick and choose when we went there, maybe when the crowds weren't so large. But Jellyfish Lake is an inland lake where there's all these jellyfish that have evolved to lose their sting. There are golden jellyfish and what's called moon jellyfish. And they're absolutely beautiful. And there's thousands of them. And you can swim the lake and they just caress your skin as you go by. You can actually hold them in your hands gently because they're very delicate. But that's a very popular spot is to visit Jellyfish Lake. If you look at any info about visiting Palau, that's probably one of the sites that's going to come up is to visit Jellyfish Lake.
And I feel if you've heard of Palau, and we've talked about it on the show before many years ago with Gary Arndt, you probably heard about it because of Jellyfish Lake. It feels like it's the most well known thing about
Yeah,
the whole
exactly.
country.
I had been there. I guess the population of jellyfish kind of ebbs and flows. Some seasons there's a lot more than others, but you're almost guaranteed to experience and see the jellyfish there. It was a pretty good population when we were there this last time. It's very interesting because some of the places that you visit are very shallow reef with very colorful corals. And so
Hmm.
you might be floating just a foot above these corals in the water. It's very shallow. So you get very up close personal view of the corals and you see all these little tiny fish swimming in around and living in the corals. And of course you have all kinds of species of fish that are obviously competing each other, trying not to get eaten or to eat each other. So that's very interesting. One place is called Einstein's Garden. The guy who we went with paddling Palau, he's actually one of the people who named a lot of these places. He's the guy in Palau about organizing travel in these islands. But he named it. He named it Einstein's Garden. It's this very colorful collection of coral that kind of look like brains.
I was going to say it's
Yeah, the
brain coral.
little,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, brain coral. And you have this very bright green right next to a very bright purplish or a very bright yellow. And so it's very colorful clumps of coral right next to one another that look like brains. And
Hmm.
he called it Einstein's Garden, referring to Einstein's brain. But it's very beautiful and there's all kinds of colorful coral.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? We call it Semillon-heure. Parfait. Semillon o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Some of the experiences are floating on these really shallow coral reefs. And then where I think the marine life gets really interesting is when you get out to the outer reefs where it drops off very deep. And so in the deeper water, you'll see much larger fish. You'll tend to see sea turtles. We've even saw a few sharks swimming, black-tipped sharks. But one of my favorite things is to drift along that drop off where on the one side you have the shallow corals and the other side you have this big drop off. And
Hmm.
so that intermixing of the different types of fish there, it's a very active area. Basically,
Hmm.
you have the two different environments coming together. And some of these outer reef areas are obviously places where divers go as well. So you'll see these dive boats out there as well. Palau is popular, but it's not overly crowded.
It's a little hard to get to, for one thing,
It's
as we
hard to
talked
get
about.
to. During the day, you will see other groups out there with their boats dropping off divers or also snorkeling, but it tends not to interfere with your day and what you're doing. A lot of the itinerary is planned and based around tides because the
Okay.
level of the tide is going to dictate where you go and where the boats can go during the day. Fortunately, the
Right.
kayaks can go almost everywhere because they have such a shallow draft. But the other thing is not just the level of the tides, but the currents. If they would
Okay.
like to take you out to drift, they call it drift snorkeling, where you're just going with the current. The boat might drop you off at one part and let the current take you down for several miles, and then the boat will come and pick you up at the end of the reef area. So where you go and what you do is very much dependent on the tides and the currents. And that's why it's really good to go with a company because they know what they're doing. In fact, our trip, our guide Ron, he had our trip all scoped out almost a year in advance based on the tides, the tidal
Oh,
predictions. Um,
okay.
so that's one reason why you really should probably go with a company just because they're very familiar with the tides and everything.
Okay.
And obviously, those tides are also going to influence when and where different types of fish species might be available or where you might see them as well.
Okay. Makes sense.
You'll see a lot of more divers out in the outer reefs where it's deeper.
Now, you mentioned in your intro a couple different types of things that you saw that we haven't talked about as we got into the detail. One, you said giant clams,
Mm-hmm.
which still, we talked about them recently on the Mindanao show, but I'm always surprised that they really exist. I guess is probably where I am with giant clams. It seems like something from Hollywood, but that
And
is
it does
something
seem
that
like
you,
something from Hollywood. They're absolutely fascinating. And when I say large, they're large. I'm trying to think about standing on its end, maybe 3, 4 feet tall,
okay.
sort of thing. It's almost like they could gobble you up, almost like human-sized bite. They're so large. They aren't everywhere, but there are a few places. It's a very popular destination to take people to see the giant clams. And so they're typically about 10 feet down. And so you can obviously see them floating from above when you're snorkeling, but you can dive down easily close to 10 feet and get a close up view of the giant clams.
Okay. Was there one particular spot that was the best for seeing those from your trip?
There is, and I'm sorry I don't know the name off the top of my head to where it was, but all the dive companies and certainly know where that is. Actually, I believe it's pretty close to Jellyfish Lake, that
Okay.
island. Oh,
You,
I guess we're talking about snorkeling. I should mention that it's warm. It's
yeah.
typically 80-degree water, very clear. You can see 100 feet easily down. It's extremely clear. The weather and temperature in Palau doesn't really change much throughout the year. It's pretty close to the equator. It's north of the equator, but pretty close. And so typically it's like a low of 80 degrees and a high of 82 pretty much throughout the year. So it's pretty much the same temperature all the time. It is tropical. They get a lot of rain. The rainy season is considered like July, August timeframe,
Okay.
but it's really not that much more than throughout the year. I believe the average monthly precipitation in the quote dry season is about 9 inches a month, and in the rainy season it's about 12 inches a month. It's a tropical place. It's basically 80 degrees and very humid, but you get used to that real quick when you're out there.
Did that
But
affect when you decided to go? Now you know you've been twice. Is it not different enough between the rainy season and the dry season that there's a particularly good time to go? Or
you can go year round. Most of the visitation comes from the fall, winter into spring. I think a lot of the people in Palau tend to go away and go and visit elsewhere, like the local peoples who work for the tour companies and stuff. The summer is
Mhm.
their vacation time. They do get lower visitation during the summer. I think you could definitely do it, but I don't know that there's a bad time to go.
Okay.
For example, our recent trip in January, we had an unusual number of daily storms every day where it just poured rain. We'd have a big storm that would come through in the middle of the day and just pour rain for 30 minutes and then pass through.
Okay.
But the interesting thing about that is when you're snorkeling underwater, it doesn't matter. The fish don't care. So we'd be out kayaking in the storm, and you could be snorkeling in the storm, and
Right,
it's
right.
calm underwater, and it's warm, so it's not like you're getting cold. But when we were there the first time, 11 years prior, I don't remember any rain during our trip. Maybe a little bit at night, but this trip it was very unusual. It was almost daily storms, but it didn't affect what we did or anything.
Well, you're
Uh,
wearing your swimsuit and your swim shirt most of the time, I would guess.
Yeah, and because it's so warm, you don't need to wear wetsuits or anything like that. I typically
Mhm.
just have shorts and maybe a rash guard, a long sleeve
Just for
rash
sun
guard, and
protection.
the long sleeve is more about sun protection than
Yes.
necessarily warmth. If you are going to be in the water a long time, some of our snorkels were anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. Some people who are less insulated, unlike me, might get a little chilly if they're prone to be cold. And a few people in our group had some short, thin wetsuit like material, but I never used a wetsuit the whole time. And I think most people would be okay without any kind of extra warmth like that. Let's see. One thing I should mention is there's a very interesting World War II history here. And some people come visit Palau just for the World War II history. Before I visited, I really didn't know a whole lot about it.
Mhm.
But throughout some of these islands, there are these old Japanese bunkers that are
Mhm.
there that you can visit. And there was a major battle in Palau during World War II, towards the end of World War II, the Battle of Palau. The Japanese had been dug in all throughout the Palau Islands. And as I understand it, they were tempting the U.S. and allies to invade and come into the islands. But the U.S. treated it mainly as an air war. And there are these old artifacts of all these Japanese bunkers, and that you actually find these planes underwater, like Japanese Zeros that had been shot down or crashed during the war. And so some of the places that we visited, they're in like very shallow water, and we'd actually kayak right over top of this plane, or you might snorkel around the plane. And in fact, my understanding is that while there was this big air war, that the U.S. never actually came ashore to any of the islands until the war was over.
I think what I
Japanese
read is
had,
that they took over the southern part of the islands, but they did not try and take over the big island, basically, or the northern part of the islands where the Japanese were.
yes, that's true. I now remember that, what they were telling us. But what's interesting is we had a whole day just north of that island that you just referred to. There's another island. There was all these Japanese bunkers. And we actually spent a day kayaking around this island and stopping and walking a little bit into the jungle to see these Japanese bunkers. And at one point, there is a U.S. Sherman tank sitting in the middle of the jungle. It's the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. Like, how in the heck did this tank get there? So I think what happened was once the war ended and Japan surrendered, I think that's when the U.S. came in to populate some of these islands as defense mechanisms, and that's how those tanks got there. I don't think it was like during the active part of the war. I think they were put there later on. Wrong
Did you
about
get
that.
as far down as, and I don't know how to pronounce the island of Peleliu?
Yes,
Peli. Okay, so
yes,
that
we
was
did. So
invaded by the Americans during the war. Fairly well known battle, went on for a long time. Pretty bloody when you think about what a small island it is. It went on for about 2 months, which we're talking about an island that's what, I don't know, 2 miles in length, 3 miles, 4 miles in length, maybe. Quite a nasty fight that happened and I want to pronounce it Peleliu, but I don't know if that's the correct.
that's the correct pronunciation.
Okay.
There's a little island just nearby there that we kayaked around, and that's where the Sherman tank was that we found. We actually then kayaked from that island to Peleliu. And there's actually some people who live on Peleliu, not a lot. There are some people who actually fly in there from Koror as a day trip to do the sightseeing of the World War II places. And when you visit that Epstein Museum that I referred to in Karur, there's a lot of displays on the war and the Battle of Palau there. You can learn a lot
Hmm.
there.
Okay.
So that was an interesting thing that I didn't know. I know a fair amount about the World War II in Europe, but I'm less informed about the Pacific. And this was a surprise to learn a lot about this when I visited Palau for the first time. There's actually some people who visit there just for the World War II stuff.
As somebody who has studied that part of the war, I did not associate that battle with Palau. So for me, I had that unassociated with the two things. So I didn't think about that as being part of the Palau experience. But I see that the tour company that you went actually does World War II tours exclusively too, including it looks like even as you're going around the big island of Babeldaub, that there are Japanese tanks and things like that you can see if you're looking for that during that part of your tour.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. You mentioned the tour company that I went with, Paddling Palau. So through them, you could book day trips, like a
Hmm.
few days of day trips where you go back to Karur. You could do one of these camping safaris that I described, and they would do custom trips as well. So you can arrange to do what you want. They would help you out with that. And then I would love to go diving there sometime. I haven't, but I think Paddling Palau is the main company for snorkeling and kayaking. And there's a number of dive companies, and one of the very popular ones that people often recommend is a place called Sam's Tours.
Okay.
They will help arrange diving trips with you.
Anything else we want to say about your camping experience and particularly notable days on that?
Um, Camping experience is just relaxing and fun. There are these beautiful sandy beaches on the edge of a jungle, and tents are usually set up on the transition zone between the beach and the jungle. I mentioned they're semi-permanent camps, and they
Right.
actually have somewhat permanent toilet facilities there. Not flush toilets, but toilet facilities. It's, like I mentioned the really nice walk-in tents. And so typically when you arrive on a beach from your day out, the tents were already set up for you. And then maybe an hour or two after you arrive and rest a little bit, they'll have dinner available in the dining tent in the evening. And then, of course, it's always nice to watch for the beautiful sunsets from these beaches as well.
Okay. Anything particular you would recommend people pack for Palau?
Boy, you don't need very much. It's a tropical place. Sunscreen, bathing suit, footwear, some good footwear because it's a limestone rocky island. So if you're doing any
Okay.
walking around on any of the islands and the jungle, you want to have some good footwear. When I say good footwear, good river sandals or maybe some sneakers or something like that.
Okay.
But be honest, you don't really need much to go there. It's a tropical place and you can get by with very little. Oh, and the other thing I would say, I own my own snorkel gear, mask fin snorkel. Definitely, if you have your own, bring your own because it's fitted for you and it will
For
work
fit,
for
yeah.
you. But all these companies, they will provide that gear if you don't want to bring it or don't have your own. And I will say that you do not have to be an expert in any of this to go and enjoy yourself here. The kayaking is
Hmm.
pretty easy in flat water. The snorkeling is easy and it's adaptable. You do not have to do everything every day. If you're tired and anytime you want to get out of the water, the boat will pick you up. Or if you want to take your kayak out of the water, you can adapt and make it your own trip. But I think the best thing to do is just to look over some of the offerings that the companies have and adapt it for what you want to do. One thing I did not mention as an option is I talked about these organized trips, kayaking trips where they do everything. Some of these companies will also help you do it yourself trip where you
Okay.
can rent a kayak from them. They'll provide some guidance of where to go, an itinerary, and maybe even pack some food for you. So if you want to do things more on your own, they can also help you out in planning that. If you wanted to go and kayak and camp yourself with your own camping gear in the island, that's possible.
Okay. Good to know. What else do people need to know before they pack their bags and head to Palau?
Just to recognize that it's going to be a long, tiring trip getting there, and to maybe, I always suggest planning an extra day to recover. It can be pretty hard hitting the ground running without resting up. It's about, from the US, at least from the East Coast, it's about 13-hour time difference. So it's basically on the other side of the world. Just be flexible with, as conditions change, your trip might have to be adapted to accommodate different things. But be honest, there's not a whole lot of planning you have to do other than getting there. Most of the companies will take care of everything.
Excellent. Photography. I guess I didn't say that Randy is a patron of the show, or didn't mention that this time. And in the patron calls, the Zoom calls, I know you are often taking photos that you have taken and showing us that. Any particular trips for a trip like this where some of your best shots are going to be underwater?
I have not taken any underwater. I just took my standard iPhone on this last trip for above water, but very fortunate because the guy who ran the trip, Ron Lidich from Paddling Palau, he is a fantastic underwater photographer.
Got it.
And so as part of the trip, he goes and he's part of our snorkeling trip, and he will go down and take incredible pictures of fish and the clams and everything. And so at the end of the trip, he provides a thumb drive of all the underwater photography. So that's some of those photos you saw. That's how I got them. I did not take them myself.
Your tip is travel with a photographer.
Exactly. Travel with a photographer, because his shots are just amazing that you would never get on your own. At least I would never get on my own. I guess if you want to do underwater photography, you can take your gear there and they'll accommodate you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Your 3 most favorite photos from the trip.
There's a photo of me holding a moon jellyfish in Jellyfish
Okay.
Lake. There's a picture of me diving down in front of one of these giant clams. Just photos of some of the very colorful fish swimming around me.
Excellent. As we get to our wrap-up questions, they're coming, Randy. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Okay, if I may, I'm going to cheat and offer 2 answers. One is underwater and one is below water.
Okay.
Prettiest spot for me underwater is I'm floating on this drift current on the outer edge of a big drop-off. And on my right is a shallow coral reef with hundreds of tiny fish weaving through the corals. But on my left, there's this big drop-off, hundreds of feet down, and I'm seeing very large fish and a sea turtle swimming by. So it's just this dichotomy of the shallow reef life and the deep sea life coming together in one spot as you drift along in the current. Above water, prettiest spot for me it was low tide. We had parked the kayaks on this beach and we were walking out this very narrow sandy spit that goes like a half a mile to a mile out into the ocean. This spit is all covered up at high tide, but it's low tide. So you have this narrow spit and we're a mile out in the middle of the ocean surrounded by water. But then you look back at where you came from and you see the colorful kayaks parked on the beach and the sun's starting to set. And so that was the prettiest spot of standing in the middle of the ocean on the spit, looking back to these kayaks. You mentioned photography. One of the things that on this trip, our photographer guide, he had a brand new drone that he was playing with. And so he had that along and he was flying it and taking incredible pictures. For example, when I mentioned walking out on this sandy spit, he had these great overhead shots of our group walking out on this spit. And because it was nearing sunset, he was getting these great shots of our long shadows, individuals walking with these long shadows cast because of the sun. And also nice overhead shots of our camp with our kayaks on the beach zooming in. I'd be honest, I don't know if you have to have a permit or anything to use the drones. They could tell you that, but the drone footage as well as the underwater footage that he provided was just fantastic.
Very cool. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Palau.
Only in Palau. You're floating around on the outer reef in the middle of the ocean. You seem to be far away from anybody. All there are your friends of your group all around you. You feel like you're all alone. And then you notice these bubbles rising from below you. And it turns out there's people down there below you who are divers. And so maybe it's just funny that you think you're not near anything or anyone, and there's people down there below you.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Palau in just 3 words, Randy?
Tropical marine life. Everything is about the marine life in Palau.
Our guest again has been Randy Rohrer. Randy doesn't have a website, so we won't promote one here. But Randy, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Palau.
Thanks, Chris. Enjoy the show a lot.
A special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. And a special thanks today to Christopher Phelps, who became the latest patron this week. Thanks, Christopher. Patrons get a monthly Zoom call, the show without ads, and get the show a little early. If you're interested in learning more, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Oh, that's right. And patrons also get the first shot at trips that we do, and we should be signing up pretty soon now. The trip has been approved for Cuba for February 15th, 2025. I should be getting the booking number soon. Send that to patrons for a week, and then I'll open that up to the Facebook group, amateurtraveler.com/trips. Go there if you want more information about the trip. I heard recently from Flyer Dad, who said, loved this episode, and this was the episode on Mexico City. Loved this episode and learning more about Mexico City beyond the usual suspects. Ashley was so prepared, and even though I lived in Mexico City many years ago as a teenager, this episode made me want to go back and see all the things I missed. This might be part of a new series revisiting the lesser-known sites of a popular city or destination. Really enjoyed this episode. Well, thanks so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.